Hello everybody. So let me try again to cover MicroStrategy on the channel. I know most of my viewers don't really care about that stuff, but I do, and so I'm doing mostly this video for myself. I know this won't get many views. So MicroStrategy is a company that everybody seems to be talking about right now. I've been talking about it for a long time, nearly 2 years at least in a social media context and much higher privately. I've followed the story of MicroStrategy since 2020, granted not early 2020, but mid 2020. Since they've adopted their Bitcoin strategy, since they've adopted their policy of adopting Bitcoin as a corporation, moving to a Bitcoin treasury. And before I talk about MicroStrategy, I just want to say we are talking about very, very special assets here as far as Bitcoin and MicroStrategy goes. So of course the best asset, and I have no doubt Tesla will catch up, but right now the best, most praised, crazy asset that people talk about is NVIDIA, right? I used to own, I sold NVIDIA too early. Very sad about that. One stock that I have quite a bit of, it's being uncomfortably high, is MicroStrategy. And of course, most of my Bitcoin I own through Brain Wallet, right? Through a pure form Bitcoin. So I've had exposure for Bitcoin for a very, very long time. And Bitcoin is a leading asset. It is an absolutely leading asset. It is the asset of the 21st century. It's not a stock, it's an asset, it's a commodity. And when you look at Bitcoin, look at the performance, right? So ever since MicroStrategy adopted its a Bitcoin strategy, which I put in January of 2020. It's actually a little later. I should have put it a little later, but anyways, doesn't really matter. They've achieved 84% annual, average annual total return, so CAGR, 84% CAGR for the past 4 years. Only NVIDIA did a little better at 89% CAGR for the past 4 years. Now, when you look at NVIDIA over the past 8 years, 8.88 years here, did 79% CAGR. And my Bitcoin, GBTC being the closest proxy that I can put into my screener here, is at 69% over 8.88 years. But whether it is MicroStrategy or Bitcoin and Bitcoin ETFs that we're talking about, there's the halving coming in April. In April, the supply gets halved in April. So theoretically, you'll have twice fewer Bitcoin hitting the sales, hitting the books in April. So NVIDIA is winning right now by a hair, by just a hair. I have little doubt that come April and late 2024, early 2025, Bitcoin might be on top. And so what will the performance of MicroStrategy be then? Right? It will probably be quite outstanding in my view. And that's why it's a company that I'm not selling, that I'm never ever planning to sell, quite frankly. A company whose return have equaled NVIDIA. So these are humbling numbers. We're talking about a special business. We're talking about Michael Saylor, which is the oldest founder, leading CEO of a public company. Granted, he's not the CEO anymore. He stepped down of the role, but he is still leading that company, even though he's not the CEO anymore. And he's not done fighting. I consider MicroStrategy to be a clearly founder-led companies. He's clearly the face of the company, and he bet his own company on Bitcoin. And you are investing in one of, in my view, the biggest Bitcoin visionaries of our era. You're investing in someone whose vision is steadfast. I mean, literally the whole internet for 1 year made fun of him, said, oh, you are going to be margin called because we couldn't even read a company statement. And you still have people who think this company can get margin called, hence the short that we had today against MicroStrategy and the stock dropping 8-ish%. we'll see what are the benefits, what are some of the criticism and benefits of MicroStrategy. But let me just use some narratives. We know that narratives drive stock over the short term, over the medium term. They drive stocks over the long term. I believe it's mostly weighing machines. Actually the weight of a company drives the return, but short term narratives matter. And this is a comparison that I have no issue making. If Elon Musk is the Thomas Edison of our era, is Michael Saylor the JP Morgan of our era? And we don't see this coming yet. And I realize that this is more of a 2034 assessment to make. But when in 2034, if that comes through, if and when people make that assessment in 2034, it will be too late to buy the stock. And so that's the nature of risk here. That's why I'm owning the stock, because I like risk and I like the returns associated with risk. So what's the narrative? Let's make it very simple. Let's use a very simple narrative for MicroStrategy right now. You have a lot of FUD on the internet. A lot of people say, oh, it's overvalued. Now, I will generously, this is generous, but I will generously assume that their debt cancels out by the value of the operating business. And this depends what valuation you want to grant to the operating business of MicroStrategy. If you want to grant the operating business of MicroStrategy a typical SaaS valuation, then the value of MicroStrategy more than outweighs the value of the debt. If you want to, price it, I don't know, 600, 800 million, $1 billion, then it doesn't. But I'll generously assume, for the sake of analysis, that this cancels out. And so if this cancels out, if the software business is roughly worth the value of the debt, then we're only left with 214,000 Bitcoin. So more than 1% of all of the Bitcoin supply 214,000. That is worth, as of the trading price today, $15.2 billion is what it's worth. The market cap of the company, market cap now being relevant since we got out of the debt earlier, the market cap is 29.6 billion. So let's call it a 2x. MicroStrategy is roughly trading at 2 times the Bitcoin, 2x the Bitcoin. And so the question that we ask yourself is that too much? Well, I will make another imperfect comparison. So MicroStrategy trades at two times its assets, 2 times the Bitcoin. Let's talk about JP Morgan. JP Morgan trades at 1.94 times its assets. And I'm imperfectly using book value as a proxy for assets. I know it's not exactly perfect, but I'm using 1.94 as a proxy for assets. So 1.94x, 2x, so roughly the same, right? We're roughly about trading the same, except what's the big difference? JP Morgan is trading at 2x assets that are mostly held in a melting ice cube. And by that, I mean mostly bonds. Sorry, dollars, right? Mostly bonds or dollars. Most of the money upon which the market grants a multiple on JP Morgan is held in melting ice cubes. Bonds, who we know the value is getting devalued. And so should MicroStrategy trade at a premium to JP Morgan, which currently does not? Should it trade at a premium for holding the highest quality asset ever? Should it? And I really think it should. There's other reasons as to why there should be a premium on a stock like MicroStrategy compared to, say, ETFs, GBTC, etc. First of all, many investors cannot buy Bitcoin ETFs such as GBTC, or they can't buy a Bitcoin. They can only buy securities, and sometimes they can only buy securities through a basket of assets. That's why a lot of people say if MicroStrategy enters the S&P 500, that means the average investor will have an automatic allocation to Bitcoin, and it will be a self-fulfilling strategy. And of course, MicroStrategy is not going to enter in the S&P 500 that easily. They must hate that stock in the S&P 500, but eventually they will. Just like Tesla got added very late to the S&P 500, I believe MicroStrategy will be added one day, but they will be very late. But at some point, they'll look at their rules and they'll say, oh, wait a minute, this company is bigger than half of the companies on the index. We have to add this company to the index, and it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy when that happens. Another reason, so we said the ETF addition to the S&P 500. We said some investors can't buy the ETF or the Bitcoin. A third one is MicroStrategy is an operating company. And what it means is that it can short the US dollar. It can issue debt to buy Bitcoin. And it can do that in a way that we can't as individuals, and it can do that in a way that even leveraged ETFs can do. And granted, they haven't come out yet. We'll see if they come out. But you could mimic that with futures and with options. What leverage can't do is have debt that is not marked to market. And this is the beauty of MicroStrategy. The debt is not marked to market. The Bitcoin dropping 75-80% does not trigger a liquidation, which would not be the case for a leverage ETF. If you have a leverage ETF on an asset that drops 80% in value, you got a liquidation that is getting triggered there. That would not happen in the case of MicroStrategy because it's a long-term convertible debt, due in 2029. And as they issue more debt, it will get into the 2030s, 2035s. It's long-term debt. It's not marked to market. It's like a mortgage. A mortgage is not marked to market, even if you're underwater. Right, and we could have a different discussion as to whether they should, because they probably should, and that's the issue with the fiat system and with the debt system, is we have too much debt because our assets are not marked to market. But anyways, here's another way to think about it. Saylor compares Bitcoin to the granite under Manhattan, and if you listen to him a lot, you'll hear him say that multiple times. Bitcoin is like owning the granite under Manhattan, and this tells me. And he's talked about a hotel before, comparing it to a hotel. Very, very influential Bitcoin thinker. And this tells me that even though Saylor is now not okay earning rent on that granite, he's not there. He doesn't want to earn rent on the granite because it's mostly unsafe for now. That's not going to be exactly the case in the future. And we know that he started investing in Lightning Network and in other systems such as Bitcoin for corporation. So in my view, there will be a point, and the market will give pressure to Saylor at some point, but there will be a point where the granite owned under Manhattan, that 1% of the layer upon which the future financial system may be built, that 1% owned by MicroStrategy, will someday earn yield, right? Yield. And if it yields yield, this is where this number is too low. This is where this number doesn't make sense. And so I realize this is we're not there yet, but stocks price the future value, right? They pull forward the future value of the company, and the potential of this company is absolutely tremendous. The potential is for them to earn rent on that 1% of the Bitcoin network. This is where the opportunity lies for MicroStrategy. If Bitcoin keeps growing, you'll be in a situation where the company MicroStrategy will have more Bitcoin than entire countries. And this is where this strategy is brilliant in my view, because there will be many ways for MicroStrategy to make money on its Bitcoin, and these ways won't necessarily be available to us if we own Bitcoin in, say, a ETF. In an ETF, you can't do it. Now, if you own pure Bitcoin, it's your Bitcoin, right? You can do whatever. But if you own it in an ETF, you're not going to be able to do a lot of these things, right? And MicroStrategy will be able to do it on our behalf. Now, if you own your Bitcoin in direct, you own real Bitcoin, then you can do all of this stuff on your own. But this is where I see the future. This is where we have a lot of emergence. So one of the things that MicroStrategy will be able to do in the future, of course, is to operate a layer 2. And, a lot of Bitcoiners are really, really pro Lightning Network, but there's other layer 2s that I would argue, are even more promising than Lightning Network. There will be layer 2s for Bitcoin for transaction fee free payments, or like near free transaction fees, free of transaction fees payments using Bitcoin. These networks will exist, not just Lightning, and we don't know which one it will be. But when that happens, I can tell you there will be a small transaction fee that will be earned on all of that Bitcoin that is staked on a layer 2. And this is what MicroStrategy will be able to do. It will be able to collect a toll on the transaction happening on the Bitcoin network, or on the 1%. of the Bitcoin network that it owns. That's one thing it can do. Another thing it can do is it can lend the Bitcoin to an exchange for liquidity. And as a result of lending your Bitcoin to an exchange for liquidity, you're going to earn yield for lending your own Bitcoin, right? This is something that may be able to do that we don't really do too much yet. And a lot of people are wary moving into that direction because so far the security is not always the best, but the security is getting better and your odds of getting your Bitcoin stolen are getting lower and lower, and we will get there eventually. Another thing he can do is go see a traditional bank, Saylor can do that, and pledge Bitcoin and borrow more fiat to buy more Bitcoin with existing Bitcoin. You can do that. You can buy Bitcoin on leverage, which is something that he famously did a year and a half back with a Genesis loan. So you can do that again, and I have no doubt that he will. If you have too much collateral, if you over collateralize, you can juice up your returns. And Saylor has such conviction that I have a little doubt that he will. Then you can also use your newfound Bitcoin credit worthiness or credit worthiness in general. Now that this company is going to get a higher credit rating, is going to get an S&P 500, etc., this company is going to become more credit worthy, right? If the system works properly, the credit rating of this company should go up. And so what that means is that you can use that to write call options, right? You sell a promise to buy a Bitcoin in the future at an agreed upon price. And since MicroStrategy, and I quote, will be buying Bitcoin forever, they can write and sell these call options, and some of them will expire worthless, leading them to buy more Bitcoin. Others will expire in the money, leading them to buy Bitcoin that they would have bought anyways. So I think this actually could be a really interesting strategy to acquire more Bitcoin now, and acquiring it most of the time through call options. I love that strategy. I don't know if anybody has come up with that one already. But anyways, another thing is you could eventually do pure Bitcoin lending according to the rules of Austrian economics. And I will end it there because I know that if you're a true Bitcoiner and if you really follow that, you're even against the very beginning of the idea of lending, right? In a hard money system, in a hard money standard like Bitcoin, lending is very rare. But it still exists. Lending will still exist for the finest project, the highest return projects, the projects that are the most worthy. And in a Bitcoin world, if we are a hyper Bitcoinized world and everybody uses Bitcoin for every single transaction, in that case, obviously things like mortgages, for example, disappear. Things like these government-sponsored, very low interest loans, such as mortgages, such as car loans, they will mostly disappear. But what will not disappear is, say, the investment loan for a business to grow. That will always exist, and these loans will be possible. Hard money loans will be possible, except they will be much more expensive. And this is a big debate in Austrian economics, which is what is the natural interest rates? What would be the natural interest rate? Like, we know it's more than 10% natural interest rate, but what is it? Is it 15%? What's the natural interest rate for Bitcoin? What is the interest rate at which people will agree to part with their Bitcoin for a little while and take the risk to get it back in the future? Like, what's the proper compensation for that risk? Probably about 15%, maybe 10% if you're very credit worthy. That's definitely not 2 or 3, right? 2 or 3 is fiat monetary printing system type of loaning. That's where you get 2 and 3% in a true Austrian economic system, which, if you believe in Bitcoin, you believe eventually we'll get there. If we eventually get there, those loans will be much more expensive, which means that the amount of yield that MicroStrategy could earn on its Bitcoin and the amount of yield that anybody who owns Bitcoin could earn is likely going to be much higher than the yield that your typical bank earns. And so MicroStrategy, because of all of this, I believe is not overvalued. I am not adding the stock at these levels. I have more than a full position. Remember, I was making videos when this was trading in the 180s one time. I made a video on this one. So I got my position, but I'm not planning on ever selling it. And if you add to that the fact that there's maybe short squeezes coming and who knows? That's not my type of game. But if you're a short-term investor and you're into trying to spot the next short squeeze, that might be also an interesting play. But me, I'll take the roller coaster. Conclusion is, I believe the present value of the future Bitcoin yield here is not priced in, let alone the ability to leverage up and buy more Bitcoin. I think it's not even close. And I'm happy to own this company, even though I'm not buying at this level, mostly for psychological reasons, because I've got some shares that I paid 10 times less. So, not investment advice. This is just entertainment, no financial advice. I hope you were entertained. I appreciate your likes. I appreciate your subscribes. Please follow me on X. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful day.